Hi there, and welcome to the Future Makers podcast by MAND. This is where we talk to people from scientific and high-tech organizations with a purpose. I'm Angina Herman, and Ave Idavine is hiding under the hood to make sure everything runs. Say hi to everyone, Ave.
Hello.
Today we get to speak with Thomas Käslin. Thomas is the CEO of a startup that helps companies reduce carbon emissions while providing farmers with biochar to improve their soil health. Welcome, Thomas.
Hi, Angina. Hi, Ave. Nice to be here.
So, tell us, Thomas, why does Cotierra exist?
Well, first of all, to fight climate change, and second of all, to help those most affected by climate change adapt to it. So it's about helping the coffee value chain adapt to changing climate conditions and to deteriorating soil quality with our solution.
Okay, so what is your solution? What do you actually do?
So what we're doing is we're changing the status quo of agricultural residues in the field. In our case, we take the woody residues from a coffee plantation and transform it into biochar, a very potent soil improver. We then add that to the soil to help increase the soil health. And on the other hand, we're transforming the carbon that was previously captured during the plant's growth into stable carbon connections. And when we add those to the soil, we store carbon in the soils for centuries.
So what does that mean? What is this residue and how does it happen? Walk me through it. It sounds very complicated.
Yes, so it's a process that is actually known since hundreds of years of making charcoal. Just that it of course has a different twist to it of making it in a very clean and very traceable way so that we can really measure everything that's happening along the way and that everything works in a very clean way. And what's happening is that we are putting the biomass, so in our case the woody residues, we put them in a closed container. So in a cylindric form, we close it off of the oxygen and we heat that up. And through heating that up, it starts to generate a gas, and we use that gas to generate more heat. And after a few hours inside of this closed container, the whole biomass has transformed from being wood into becoming biochar. And this material really has amazing effects for the soil because it acts like a sponge in the soil, improving the texture of the soil, but also improving water and nutrient retention and uptake capacities of the soil. So really, really boosting soil fertility.
So the char comes from charcoal.
Yes, it's actually a very similar process from charcoal making from the past. Exactly, that's why it's biochar, because we're charring the product or the biomass.
Nice.
So it's not a fertilizer, but it's something that could maybe help farmers use less fertilizers, I suppose.
Exactly. If you're currently imagining a tropical soil, so where we are active and where biochar actually works best to improve soil conditions, those are very poor soils. They have very, very little nutrient retention capacities. And at the same time, it's heavy weather conditions, a lot of intense rain. So if you put fertilizer on top of your field and the soil cannot really hold it and it rains once, more than half of the fertilizer just gets washed away and cannot be used and accessed by the plant and just goes into the next river, into groundwater, and it's actually a complete waste. And we change that by charging the fertilizer into the sponge, so the biochar. We often compare it to sponge, and then in this sponge, the roots of the plant can go and access those nutrients. It's like a battery storage where they can always go and access the nutrients.
Do continue. This sounds exciting.
Yeah, I hope I'm achieving to make it step by step more understandable for everyone because yeah, the soil is a complex organ in the sense of the world. So there are lots of processes going on. And yeah, when we're going to the side of carbon emissions, we have the most direct side of the impact is that the plant basically during its growth it captures CO2. And then in our case, when you do the pruning of the trees, those woody residues, they get left and piled up on the field and decompose, or they're even being burned, basically releasing all the carbon that they have previously captured back into the atmosphere. So what we are doing is actually we're avoiding that release back to the atmosphere by transforming the carbon that is inside of that biomass into stable form. So into that biochar, which is like 80% carbon. So the carbon stays inside of the char that we have as the end product, and we add that to the soil. So we do from basically carbon neutral carbon cycle of nature, we make it a storing cycle. So we take part of it out of the atmosphere and store it in the soil. That's the primary effect. But then, due to restoring the soil's health, we have a huge secondary effect as well, which is that we reduce fertilizer usage by at least 30%. And that, of course, reduces fertilizer emissions in coffee production significantly. And worldwide, fertilizer have 5%, so 1/20th of all global emissions are directly related to fertilizers. That's huge for one single thing in the world. So by reducing that, we have a big impact also on global emissions.
So what's the business part of here are you getting paid for? So you're selling biochar, you're selling carbon points, or what is it? Where do you get your money from?
Yes, so we're focusing on two sides with a very similar product in the end. So we're offering carbon insetting. So insetting meaning inside of your own value chain to coffee brands. So to coffee brands, we're helping them reduce the emissions inside their own supply chain at the farm level. So by implementing those interventions, we're reducing their farm level emissions by 50%, and we're selling to them the CO2 reduction in a sense. So we offer carbon emission reduction in your supply chain as a service with our end-to-end solution. And they pay us per ton of CO2 reduced and removed on the farm level.
Why is this attractive to farmers?
So why is it attractive to the farmer side? So that's the other side of the business. That's our user, or you can even call it our beneficiary. So the main point is they provide us with the biomass and they get the biochar back in an exchange, basically. So biomass for biochar. In a later stage, you will buy biomass plus work input from their side for biochar. And why is it interesting for the farmers? They significantly improve their profit margins. So they improve it by 30%. In the case of a Colombian farmer, that's around $700 per hectare per year, which he saves in fertilizer inputs. And there's an additional yield increase that we're boosting with biochar. So this two affects having a little bit more yield and reducing fertilizer significantly. So approximately $700 he has in his pockets more every year. For perpetuity, because the impact is very, very permanent.
Nice.
Just wanted to explain quickly the second side of the revenue model. So yeah, the second side of the revenue model is carbon removal credits. So there is that huge and growing markets of voluntary carbon credits, where there's a shift going on towards high quality carbon removal credits. And we are offering that on the voluntary carbon markets. So we're also setting up projects that are dedicated to generate carbon removal credits solely. So those credits will then be purchased on the carbon removal market for offsetting. So for compensation of residual emissions from companies. And those can be companies in financial services, in tech, insurances, a lot of industries that are currently buying those credits to compensate outside of their value chain what they cannot reduce themselves.
Okay, so you have a very wide customer base, but very different products that you're selling to them, all of them. So you mentioned that this is a decentralized solution. the part where you collect the biomass. So what does that mean? And like I'm hearing, like from the farmer's perspective, they give you biomass, they get biochar back. What does the decentralized mean here? Do they get their own biomass back turned into biochar, or is it all
Yeah, our
integrated?
solution is fully circular. So it's exactly how you said. It's the same biomass that we get from the farmer. It's processed into biochar and gets applied to the same soil. So really, really circular model in like very closed loop systems. And what it means to be decentralized is exactly also that. So it means that we can access residues close and near or on the farm. So instead of bringing all the residues with huge logistics towards one centralized location and then bring back the biochar, we bring the solution, so our reactor, to the farmers, and this means decentralized, right? So we have a transportation system of the reactors, accessing those decentralized farm networks, because that's how most of the coffee and also cacao farm networks work, right? They're not huge farms in centralized locations. They are distributed, and they are smallholder farmers. So they need a different kind of solution if we compare it to the US or Switzerland, where you can easily centralize residues, where you can build up the logistics easily. In those regions, it's very different. I hope I explained that well. I hope that
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
understandable.
I'm understanding so much more. I mean, of course, I tried to learn this, and when we first learned about your company, I've heard your company pitch, and I'm like, this sounds interesting, but so complicated. I can't figure out where all these pieces fit together. So it's really nice to hear you explain it a bit more than during a, what was it, 7 minute pitch or something. So it's starting to dawn on me now, finally. But I'm curious, like this is a complicated value chain for you guys. So how did you come up with this whole system, and what was hardest to make this whole thing work? Or is it even working yet?
To address the final question, yes, it's working. We
Good.
have implemented 2 projects on the ground already, but still learning, still improving on the go. Yeah, so I think what was hardest was to learn how we can make a solution that really works for that supply chain, for the farmers on the ground, and is adjusted to what is needed in order to help them restore the soil health, in order to help them adjust and adapt to a changing climate conditions. Um, that was a challenge, and it still is a challenge. We're still working on getting better at this every day. But that process is the challenging one, but at the same time, it's also where we differentiate ourselves with our solution, really being fully adapted to the local context in the global south, and taking along the farmers, the ones that need to adopt our solution in the end, taking them along on the journey and learning with them together. And I think you had the first part of the question.
And I think the first part was, how did you even come up with whole complicated system here? And I think that's already more or less answered. So I'm actually curious, like, how did you end up knowing these farmers here even? So what's your connection to Colombia, which I suppose is where you're most familiar with the local systems?
Yeah, so I have a wife. I have a wife that is Colombian. We're together since 8 years at the exchange semester in Colombia. So I have quite a network in Colombia on the one hand, but in the coffee value chain, it actually goes much more through the connections we make with international players in the coffee industry. So there is that amazing coincidence that Switzerland is a huge player in the global coffee value chain, and that Colombia happens to be a huge producer in coffee.
Hmm.
So we actually go together in partnerships with multinational traders and their local, so Colombian subsidiary companies. We go with them to the farmers. So we don't go and convince each individual farmer. We actually go and use the networks, the existing networks of larger players, to go together with them to the farmers and to leverage their connections and their on-ground personnel for farmer onboarding, farmer training, farmer selection.
So for me, this I personally find it always challenging living in Europe, living in Switzerland, in one of the richest countries in the world, and having a very privileged life here, also being responsible for a lot of carbon emissions. And how have you navigated this power balance? So you find here in Switzerland, and you have the Swiss education and all the Swiss resources, and then you're working on solutions in the global south. So it could be seen like the white man comes and saves the world, or it could be seen that you are a greedy Swiss guy who just offshores all the business or all the cheap labor in Colombia. And how do you make sure that this is not how you are perceived, that you're actually doing something valuable?
Yeah, I think that that question has two sides, all right? One is the perception from the ground up, I would say, so from the farmer side, how they perceive us, and the other one of the offshoring, that's probably the perception from Europe, that so we can address those
Yeah.
2 points separately. So on the farmer side, I think it comes to what we've mentioned before in certain things like biochar production, biochar application, we're very knowledgeable. And of course, there's like, okay, we come and we teach them and we educate. But they very quickly realize that we are there to learn from them at the same time as well. Right? So they
Hmm.
know much more about their soils, they know much more about their climate, they know much more about their work processes and how our solution can be integrated into their processes. So we really do their co-creation together with the farmers, together with the local organizations. So they realize from day one, okay, that's not someone that comes here and dictates something. It's
Hmm.
really something that we're doing together. So that's that side for the farmer side, and in the end, also the solution really benefits the farmer in the end with
Hmm.
having being able to reduce fertilizer usage, increasing yields, restoring the soil's health. So I think on that side there's really that big advantage for the farmer as well. And then if we're going to the other side of offshoring the work to developing countries on reducing or saving the climate, um, the amazing part is that it doesn't matter where we take out CO2. It doesn't matter where
Hmm.
we're reducing CO2 in the world. We all benefit from it. So that's the first part. It doesn't matter, right? Because in the atmosphere, everything is going to mix. It's you should do it wherever you have most potential to do it. And then
Hmm.
the tropics just provide this huge advantage of abundant unused biomass and underutilized biomass and huge agricultural production that is still to be revolutionized or transformed into regenerative agricultural practices. And so we have a much bigger delta that we can tackle, a much bigger improvement potential that we can tackle, and a much bigger biomass potential that we can tackle in the tropics, in the global south. So it definitely makes sense to do it in those regions. And last but not least, the one I've already previously mentioned, um, smallholder farmers are the ones most affected by it, by climate
Hmm.
change. So it's also has also to do with climate justice, helping those that are most affected and probably have done the least to contribute to it, helping them adapt to a future where the climate is changing and to making them able to cope with it,
Hmm.
is also a huge factor why that all makes sense.
Yeah, how does that work as a CEO leading people in such different environments? But you are already split across two continents, let alone two countries and two cultures, two different time zones. So how do you keep it together as a company?
Very cool question because I think it is a challenge, but the challenge has also a lot of benefits at the same time because mixing different cultures together can also boost so much the creativity and the vibe inside of a company, right? If everyone is the same, it becomes very has a lot of blind spots and maybe it becomes mundane. I don't know. So because we are not like that, right? Because we're very different. already the founders are very different in how
Yeah.
who they are as people. So I really like and enjoy those differences. I think that's the first part. But then, of course, you have time difference. You have the challenge of not being in the same place. So having to do a lot of things remote through video calls. And there, it's just from years and years working together like that in a co-founder setting uh, that we know how this works and how we need to set it up, how we need to organize personal check-ins as well, how we sync with each other, really make those spaces where we exchange on strategy, where we exchange on personal side, like really just personal, like just having a coffee together and chatting, because you also need to be working on your personal relationship between the founders, but also to the employees. So creating those spaces in a remote setting, I think, is key.
So, what has been the most challenging part? This distance or something else?
I think it's always yourself. Um, it's always a fight against yourself and making yourself better. So I think the hardest is working on yourself and becoming better. I really see a so super strong correlation between how good I am or we are as founders and we are as company by how good we are as people. So it's working on your own limitations, working on staying healthy, on staying sharp, and at the same time enjoying what we're doing and really also putting in the hour, being resilient and being able to be resilient for a long time. So it's your own limits and your own boundaries that you're pushing, and it's a very cool ride. It's intense, but that's the challenge. You yourself overcoming your own limitations.
So, what have you learned about yourself, or what boundaries have you pushed?
So one is for sure the resilience boundary on how much you can take, because in the end you will receive much more no's than yeses,
Hmm.
right? Be it in competitions, be it in sales conversations, be it with investors. Like, I mean, just like a fundraising round on how many hundreds of investors you contact and how few in the end say yes, right?
Mm.
There is some kind of, I don't even know what the industry says anymore, 1 to 10, 1 to 100 ratio. Don't know exactly where the truth lays, but you need to contact a lot more, and a lot will say no, because of many reasons, right? There are always 1,000 reasons to say no, and very few reasons, or a lot of reasons need to overlap that it's finally a yes. So that staying resilient, going forward despite the no's, believing in what you're doing. I think that you really take it to the next level once you're building a startup. Um, and and I think then the other side is a lot more personal. Um, because I have the tendency to really bite down on things, like to really bite in and like not let go until we really figure that thing out. And that can become unhealthy, right? If we do it too much, it becomes like negative. It becomes obsessed. It becomes unhealthy for yourself because it increases the stress level. So I think there about learning about balance on being ambitious and wanting to solve things, but at the same time also having that kind of relaxedness. I
Mm.
don't know, being a little bit relaxed and laid back to know, okay, if we keep working on it, it will resolve itself.
So, does this also mean that you have to be relaxed about failure? So, have you faced a lot of failure? Well, you said a lot of no's, but I understand this also meaning like you try, you try, you try. You have to have resilience, but at some point you have to understand when to stop and when to sort of just accept the failure and do something different. Has that happened with you already?
I mean, in general, yes. I think we've had many smaller and bigger failures where you need to learn to deal with it. think the first step is always trying to get out what you learned, and then exactly trying to move into that relaxation phase where you're saying like, okay, it happened. Now we just move forward. We take what we learned and we move forward. And the second part is the hard part. Taking the learnings, I think that's the easy part. Saying like, okay, we learned this and this, but then not staying back and thinking like, oh, we could have done this. Why didn't we do this? And quickly moving forward and looking forward. I think that's the huge challenge
Mm-hmm.
in that. And yeah, we had certain points where we said like, okay, no, like this it cannot work. For example, we started with individual farmers, so we started with corn and sugarcane farmers, and realized very quickly that if we have to onboard every farmer individually and step by step convince everyone, that's never going to fly. We're never going to reach the necessary scale of the solution. So there was a point where we said like, okay, we cannot do this by ourselves, and that's where in parallel we found that the coffee value chain and the urgency and the need for our solutions in that value chain, and at the same time the internationalization of the and the organization of the value chain, and that there are partners that we can work with that can help us get to hundreds of thousands of farmers. So that was the point where we said, okay, we're gonna fail, or like we started it, right? So we failed, like kind of getting a lot of farmers like this. So it was like we had to adapt.
Mm. I feel like that's a really common story you hear from entrepreneurs, is that they come up with something, a really cool thing, and then they try to make it, and it turns out to be really hard, but or they find out that it's like parts of their solution already exist. There's so much already out there, partners and workflows and things that already function, but we don't really know about it before we go into the weeds. So a lot of this entrepreneurship seems to be to figuring out what part of this value chain is not yet covered, because there's always something that you can do better than others, I feel, at least. So it seems like that's also what you guys figured out, that you're good at. I don't know, the hard, what is your, in this value chain, what do you think is your strength? You mentioned earlier the understanding the farmers, but not talking to them individually. So where do you see that you do your best and most impactful work?
Yeah, so maybe to start with, I think what we understood was that partnerships are key. So I
Mm,
think there we're very strong. So that's an area where we're very strong to like bringing together the different people needed and the different partners needed to make things work on the ground, and to really make it also work at a larger scale. And then our technical solution, I think we're very good at tracking everything that we're doing on the ground in a very clean and reliable manner, so that we
mm,
can generate data that our clients can really rely on, and put their claims on how much they reduced and how much they set into the ground, how much carbon they put into the ground, that they can prove that with very robust data, and that they don't need to doubt for a second the claims that they're making.
okay. So data and transparency, and okay, that's an interesting point. Um, we talked about failures and letting go, but you have not been a failure as a company. You're doing quite well, it seems. You just recently announced a nice big funding, so congratulations on that. What's going on with Cotierra as a company? So, what are you going to do with this funding, and yeah, where are you financially and commercially?
Yes, thanks for the congratulations, and of course, the hard work starts afterwards. So we've already made a lot happen since we received the funding, and already started, of course, implementing on the ground. So where we stand right now, we have set up two projects. I think I previously mentioned it, on the ground, and are currently setting up the third one, all with large coffee traders as our partners. So one side is proving our solution in like a smaller scale, so really showing that how it works and that it does work on the ground in a smaller scale, while building up a pipeline of thousands of farmers and organizations that want to join us, that want to roll it out inside their value chain. So that's one side. And then on the other side, of course, for those projects to be a success, we need to advance our product further and further. And that's the reactor and the integrated control system that we are developing, where we've already made significant advances. So one of the reactors will now go into continuous operation in one of those paid pilot projects, where we will use our first generation reactor to produce biochar for a longer period of time. And from there, iterate further to get to zero production readiness as soon as possible. And the other side is that control system, which we're still improving, where we try or where we want to automate the processes for the tracking and the monitoring of the project, so that we can actually automatically generate the data and verify the data for the emission reduction and carbon removal claims. So those are the focuses with what we're working on right now.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about the scale, and so you're at the core a hardware solution revolves around the reactors. And since you just mentioned it's not about centralized solutions where you have this one massive reactor per continent and everything gets delivered there, but instead the reactor comes to the farmers. How many reactors does that mean? Like, what's your goal, or what do you perceive as realistic for your business?
Yes, sure. Happy to put a few numbers to that. So one reactor covers approximately 100 farms,
Okay.
each farm having about 2 to 3 hectares of farmland. And yeah, due to that size, there will be thousands of those reactors in operation. And that's where our big strength of what I previously mentioned, the transparency and the reliability of the data and of our tracking solution comes in, because you have thousands of them operating all
Mm-hmm.
across a country, or all across South America, or all across the global South. You need to be able to generate very reliable data of what's happening in all those places. And if I'm saying thousands, let me quickly do the math. In my head, we want to reach 1 million tons of carbon removal capacity by 2028. That means, I think, 10,000 reactors operating by 2028, if I'm not completely wrong.
Wow, that's a lot. What is your competition like? Is it very competitive in your field? Are there other companies trying to poach your farmers?
I wouldn't say other companies are directly trying to close our farmers or the people we're currently working with. Um, I mean, so to really quickly paint everything. So on the one hand, we are part of a larger regenerative agricultural revolution, where you can do several interventions. So biochar is only one of the solutions. And on that side, we're just completely complementary to basically every solution you want to implement. Either in agroforestry system, you generate more biomass for us to process, so we can produce more biochar and apply more biochar in the fields. And on the other side, we really help accelerate and improve other soil practices that you would might want to implement, like cover cropping, or building up healthier humus layers, composting. All of this work better in combination with biochar. So there it's not really a competition situation, but they also work with the same farmers. And then on the biochar side, it's it's that huge divide between, we have those large industrial scale centralized solutions. They are mostly in the global north, but also some of them going towards the global south. But our clients explicitly say that we're very complementary to those solutions, because those centralized facility might work in certain regions where you have larger farms, where you have more centralized residues. But in most regions where they are operational, our clients, you need decentralized solutions like ours. So they are complementary to those. And then on the solutions that are decentralized, they're more and more entering the markets, but they have a different approach because most of them are very artisanal, so very simple solution in a sense. And compared to those, we really have a way of generating very transparent data of what we're doing on the ground, and secondly, also produce in a clean manner the biochar and eliminate all kinds of residual emissions with our specially designed reactors.
So earlier you mentioned 10,000 reactors in the world or in the global south. What does it mean? You're starting with Colombia. That's clearly your beachhead, but what other areas do you have in your site?
Yes, exactly. We start with Colombia with already a huge potential just as a standalone country. And then we go into the big five of coffee production, which is Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Honduras as the next target for expansion. Staying in coffee as a first priority, but also being opportunistic about other biomasses because we're not limited. We can process almost any kind of biomass in our reactors. We can move in almost any value chain due to our solution being decentralized and many of the value chains in the global south, agricultural value chains, being decentralized. So we're not limited there, but of course we're leveraging the existing partnerships of the global traders of coffee. So the ones we're working with, the three, they're already working with more than 3 million farmers in the global south. So the potential for this solution is huge, and 10,000 is also only a fraction of what we can do in the future.
So will the 10,000 be in Colombia, or is that already an international crowd then?
That's already an international crowd. For the 10,000, we will already be expanding, most probably to Brazil.
So at what point will I, as a consumer, get to walk into the grocery store here in Switzerland and buy coffee from a company that has been using your products?
In Switzerland, I'm not entirely sure, but we are doing a project with a large retail company in Europe. They're selling in 7 countries, and they are sourcing from this project that we're implementing their coffee, and this will be starting this autumn. The coffee will go into sales in 7 countries in Europe. Not entirely sure in which countries, or not sure if I can mention them. But yeah, so very, very soon.
Excellent. All right then. So, because this podcast is called The Future Makers, we should talk about the future that we are planning to make. So, Thomas, what will the world look like 10 years from now?
I mean, we're looking at our fraction of the world, right? We're looking at the smaller coffee farmers in the global south. And in that case, in 10 years from now, the farmers working with us will have the tools to adapt to a changing climate and still produce in a productive and in a sustainable manner, and will have contributed significantly to the fight against climate change. And you as a consumer, and me as well, and everyone listening, can be enjoying their cup of coffee with a much better conscience in the sense of the environmental footprint that it will have. So every cup will be environmentally positive.
Perfect.
That's lovely. This was Thomas Käslin from Cotierra. Thank you, Thomas. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Angina. Thank you, Ave. It was great being here.
Yes. And thank you to our audience. If you like hearing stories from people who make the world a better place through science and technology, you're in luck because there's more. So make sure to subscribe to the Future Makers podcast, for example, on Spotify. Until next time.